Welcome back. Tonight, we're settling into the quiet corners of Five Nights at Freddy's, where the answers still hide in shadows, where theories spiral endlessly without resolution, and where even the creator himself has left doors permanently locked. This is a journey through the franchise's most enduring enigmas, the mysteries that have persisted through countless games, books, and community discussions, remaining stubbornly unsolved even as the story expands in unexpected directions. Since Scott Cawthon released the first Five Nights at Freddy's game back in 2014, the community has dedicated countless hours to piecing together the fragmented narrative hidden within flickering security cameras, 8-bit minigames, and environmental details that whisper rather than shout their secrets. The franchise built its reputation not just on jump scares and atmosphere, but on a story that demanded active participation, rewarding those willing to dig through newspaper clippings, decode hidden messages, and connect dots across multiple games. Yet for all the revelations that have emerged over the years, for all the theories that eventually found confirmation, some mysteries remain as impenetrable today as they were when first discovered. These aren't the questions that got answered in later installments. These aren't the puzzles that clever theorists eventually cracked with enough scrutiny. These are the mysteries that continue to divide the community, the ones where even the most convincing theories hit walls of contradictory evidence, the secrets that Scott Cawthon himself has admitted may never receive definitive answers. Some of these enigmas stem from deliberately ambiguous storytelling choices. Others emerge from the organic evolution of a narrative that changed direction as the franchise grew beyond its creator's initial vision. A few represent moments where Scott built toward revelations that never materialized, leaving pieces of a puzzle scattered without the connecting image to make sense of them. What makes these unsolved mysteries particularly fascinating is how they've shaped the community's relationship with the franchise. Rather than frustrating fans to the point of abandonment, these persistent questions have fueled an ongoing conversation that spans forums, YouTube channels, and social media platforms. Theories build upon theories, with new interpretations emerging as each game release provides fresh context. Even if that context doesn't quite answer the original questions, the community has learned to embrace uncertainty, to find enjoyment in the speculation itself, rather than demanding concrete resolutions. Tonight, we'll explore the biggest questions that remain without satisfactory answers. We'll examine the evidence that exists, the theories that have gained traction, and why these particular mysteries have proven so resistant to solution. From locked boxes that will never open to identities that remain stubbornly unclear, from supernatural entities whose origins defy explanation to minigames so cryptic that their basic meaning remains contested, we're diving deep into the unresolved heart of Five Nights at Freddy's lore. Whether you're a long-time theorist who spent years grappling with these questions, a newer fan curious about what still puzzles the community, or simply someone who finds comfort in unsolved mysteries. As you drift towards sleep, this exploration will carry you through the franchise's most enduring enigmas. We'll visit that infamous locked box from FNAF 4, contemplate the true identity of the crying child, question who speaks through the Fredbear plush, puzzle over shadow animatronics that shouldn't exist, debate whether Golden Freddy houses one soul or two, wonder about William Afton's true motivations, decode the cryptic Midnight Motorist minigame, examine the security logbook's hidden conversations, revisit the Bite of 87 mystery, and consider the enigmatic figure known only as Phone Guy. These are the threads Scott Cawthon wove, but never quite tied together. These are the questions that remind us why Five Nights at Freddy's captured imagination so completely. The story's power lies not just in what it reveals, but in what it deliberately withholds, creating spaces where imagination and interpretation can flourish. So settle in as we examine each mystery in detail, considering what we know, what we suspect, and why definitive answers remain frustratingly out of reach. Let's begin. The box that will never be opened. At the end of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, after completing the punishing 7th night known as the Nightmare difficulty, players were presented with something utterly unprecedented in the franchise. The screen fades to show a simple grey box secured with 2 prominent locks. The player can click on those locks, hearing them rattle tantalizingly, but no amount of effort opens them. No hidden button press, no secret code, no clever manipulation of game files reveals what lies inside. Above the box, a message appears in that familiar blocky text. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now. That phrase, "for now," suggested temporary closure, a promise that eventually, somehow, the box would open and its contents would be revealed. The community immediately latched onto this mystery with characteristic intensity. What could be important enough to hide behind an unopenable container at the conclusion of what many believed would be the final FNAF game? Data miners dove into the game files, discovering something both tantalizing and frustrating. An open box sprite existed in the code, suggesting Scott had at one point intended for players to see inside. The sprite showed the box with its lid raised, but crucially, it revealed nothing about what the open box would contain. The sprite was simply a mechanical preparation for a reveal that never came. Scott Cawthon himself addressed the box mystery shortly after FNAF 4's release, posting on Steam about how disappointed he felt that the community hadn't solved the game's core mystery. He mentioned that unlike previous entries where fans quickly uncovered hidden secrets, FNAF 4's pieces remained scattered, its story completely hidden. Players had apparently become distracted by red herrings and misleading details, missing the intended narrative entirely. In his post, Scott wrote cryptically about what the box contained, stating, "What's in the box? It's the pieces put together." This suggested the box represented the solution to FNAF 4's story, a symbolic container holding the answer to what the game was actually about. But then came the part that would cement this as perhaps the franchise's most infamous mystery. Scott questioned whether the community would even accept the answer he'd originally intended, given how thoroughly they'd misinterpreted the game. He concluded by deciding that maybe some things are best left forgotten forever. That shift from "for now" to "forever" marked a significant change. The box wouldn't open, the answer wouldn't come, the mystery would remain perpetually sealed. Years passed, and new games expanded the FNAF universe in unexpected directions. The box became a running joke in the community, a symbol of Scott's willingness to leave loose ends dangling. Theories about its contents multiplied. Some suggested it contained pieces of the crying child, literally the pieces put together that the Fredbear plush promised. Others theorized it held mementos from William Afton's victims, trophies from his murders collected like those of real-world serial killers. Some believed it represented the story itself, a metaphorical container for the narrative threads Scott had woven but decided not to reveal. The box made a strange appearance in FNAF World, Scott's RPG spin-off that took a more light-hearted approach to the franchise. An open box could be found outside the playable map boundaries, and the game's clock ending told players that the pieces are in place for you. This seemed to reference the box again, suggesting that FNAF World might be providing context for understanding what the box represented. But the connection remained unclear. Was Scott saying the pieces to solve FNAF 4 now existed across multiple games? Or was this simply a meta-joke about the community's obsession with the unsolvable puzzle? In August 2024, nearly a decade after FNAF 4's release, Scott gave another interview with YouTuber Dalco, where the box came up again. His answer this time was perhaps the most definitive and simultaneously unsatisfying statement he could make. Scott explained that there was indeed something planned for the box originally, but that idea remained in the ether, as he put it. The story evolved, the franchise grew beyond his initial vision, and whatever the box was meant to reveal no longer fit the expanding narrative. He admitted, "There is something in the box, but I never pursued that, and I don't know if I can find it again." And I think that's the best answer that I can possibly give for that. This revelation fundamentally changed how the community understood the mystery. The box wasn't an unsolved puzzle waiting for clever theorists to crack it. It wasn't a secret that would be revealed in a future game once all the pieces were in place. It was an abandoned plot thread, an artifact from a version of the story that no longer existed. Whatever Scott originally intended to put in that box, whatever answer it was meant to provide for FNAF 4's confusing narrative, had been lost to the organic evolution of the franchise's direction. The security breach era brought new attention to the box through an interesting connection. In the FNAF movie's promotional materials and the film itself, Vanessa has a box in her closet that shares similar visual characteristics with the FNAF 4 box. Inside, she keeps items from her father William Afton's victims, Garrett's orange airplane, marbles, a journal, and a mirror. This sparked renewed discussion about whether the game's box might also contain victims' belongings, trophies that William collected from the children he murdered. While the movie exists in a separate continuity from the games, Scott served as the writer, lending weight to the theory that this might reflect his original vision. The box mystery highlights a unique aspect of FNAF storytelling. Scott built a narrative that demanded intense scrutiny, rewarding players who examined every detail and connected hidden clues. But he also created a story that changed direction multiple times as the franchise grew beyond his original scope. The first game was meant to be standalone. FNAF 4 was initially positioned as the final chapter. Sister Location shifted the timeline and introduced new lore elements that complicated earlier games' mysteries. By the time Security Breach arrived, the story had evolved so far from those early installments that returning to resolve FNAF 4's locked box would have required retconning or awkwardly shoehorning explanations into a narrative that had moved on. What makes this particularly interesting is how the community has responded. Rather than viewing the unanswerable box as a failure of storytelling, most fans have embraced it as an iconic element of the franchise's mystique. The box represents FNAF's refusal to provide easy answers, its commitment to maintaining mystery even at the cost of resolution. It's become a symbol of the journey being more important than the destination, of speculation and theory crafting being as valuable as concrete revelations. Some theorists refuse to give up, continuing to search for meaning in the box's symbolism, even if Scott never provides a definitive answer. They point to the way FNAF's narrative has often circled back to resolve mysteries years after they were first introduced. Golden Freddy's true nature remained unclear for multiple games before Sister Location and Ultimate Custom Night provided crucial context. The puppet's connection to Charlotte was strongly implied through FNAF 2 and confirmed more explicitly in FNAF 6's minigames. Perhaps, these optimistic theorists suggest, the box's contents might still be revealed someday, either through a future game or through Scott deciding to finally share what he originally intended. But realistically, the box will likely remain closed forever. Scott has moved on from those early story concepts, and the current direction of the franchise under Steel Wool Studios focuses on new mysteries rather than resolving decade-old questions. The box exists now as a monument to unanswered questions, a reminder that some mysteries are deliberately left unsolved, that ambiguity can be as powerful as revelation in maintaining a story's hold on its audience. The locked box taught the FNAF community an important lesson about the franchise's approach to lore. Not every question gets answered. Not every thread gets tied up neatly. Sometimes the creator himself loses track of where he was going with a particular plot element, and that's okay. The speculation, the theories, the endless debates about what might be inside that grey container with its tantalizing locks have generated more community engagement and creative thinking than any single answer could have provided. The box's contents matter less than what the box represents. The beautiful, frustrating mystery at the heart of Five Nights at Freddy's, forever sealed, forever tantalizing, forever just out of reach. The crying child's name and fate. In the FNAF community, few characters have generated as much speculation, debate, and emotional investment as the small boy at the center of Five Nights at Freddy's 4's minigame sequences. Known by various names, the crying child, the bite victim, BV, or CC, depending on which corner of the fandom you're exploring. This character's identity remains one of the franchise's most persistent mysteries. We know what happened to him. We've watched his tragic story unfold across 8 minigames. We've heard the flatline that signals his death in a hospital bed. But somehow, after all these years and all these games, we still don't definitively know his name. The minigames paint a heartbreaking picture. We control a small child with a propeller beanie, navigating a world that terrifies him at every turn. His older brother, widely interpreted as Michael Afton, based on later game revelations connecting the Afton family to these events, torments him relentlessly, wearing a foxy mask to jump out from hiding places and scare his younger sibling into tears. The bullying isn't confined to home. At Fredbear's family diner, Michael and his friends corner the crying child repeatedly, wearing masks of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica to mock his fear of the animatronics. Throughout these sequences, a Fredbear plush appears to follow the child, sometimes offering words that might be comfort or might be ominous warnings. "You know what will happen if he catches you," the plush whispers, referring to an animatronic or perhaps something else entirely. The plush's flower disappears at certain points, suggesting it might be more than a simple toy, perhaps hiding a camera and speaker that allow someone to monitor and communicate with the frightened child. The minigames build to their inevitable, horrible conclusion. At the child's birthday party at Fredbear's, Michael and his friends lift their screaming, struggling younger brother toward the stage where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie perform. They shove his head into Fredbear's mouth for what they think will be a harmless prank, a kiss from the mechanical bear. Instead, the spring lock mechanisms that allow the suit to function as both animatronic and wearable costume activate, and the jaws clamp down with devastating force. We see blood, we hear the flatline, we watch the tragic consequences of youthful cruelty colliding with dangerous technology. This event, commonly referred to as the Bite of 83, takes its date from evidence within FNAF 4, including the 1983 that appears in the TV Easter egg, showing Fredbear and friends. But here's where the mystery deepens. Despite this being such a pivotal moment in FNAF lore, despite this incident fundamentally shaping Michael Afton's guilt and William Afton's subsequent actions, we never learn the child's actual name. The games don't tell us, the minigames don't reveal it, and every attempt to extract the name through puzzles and hidden clues leads to frustration and debate. The most prominent theory comes from the survival logbook, that curious artifact that appeared alongside the Steam release of FNAF 6. This book, ostensibly a security guard's journal, contains two distinct patterns of hidden text. Faded text asks questions throughout the book, while altered text provides answers. Through a complex series of word searches and number associations, some theorists concluded the name Cassidy appears as an answer to questions about identity. But this immediately creates problems, because Cassidy is also widely accepted as the name of one of the missing children incident victims, specifically the child whose spirit inhabits Golden Freddy. This led to the Golden Both or Golden Duo theory, which suggests both the crying child and Cassidy somehow share possession of Golden Freddy. The survival logbook seems to show two spirits communicating, one asking questions and one answering, possibly representing these two souls coexisting within the same animatronic. The faded text asks, "What do you see?" and the altered text circles an image of the Nightmare Fredbear animatronic. Is Cassidy asking the crying child what he sees, trying to understand the trauma that defined his short life? But alternative readings of the logbook suggest a different name entirely, Evan, through another set of number associations and clue following. Some theorists spell out this name, arguing it makes more sense for the crying child to be named Evan, while Cassidy remains purely one of the missing children incident victims. However, the methodology for extracting Evan has been questioned by many in the community, with some suggesting the grid system used might be unreliable or reading too much into coincidental patterns. The ambiguity extends beyond just the name. What happened to the crying child's soul after death? The Fredbear plush's promise to put you back together haunts the story, but its meaning remains unclear. Did William Afton attempt to resurrect his son through the same remnant experimentation he used on his Funtime animatronics? Did the crying child's spirit end up possessing an animatronic? And if so, which one? The Golden Both theory suggests Golden Freddy, but others argue his spirit became Shadow Freddy, or another mysterious entity. Some theorists propose he never possessed anything, that he simply died, and his tragedy set other events in motion without his spirit directly participating in the haunting. The security breach era introduced new complications with the character of Gregory. Some fans noted similarities between Gregory and the crying child, leading to theories that Gregory might be a rebuilt or reincarnated version of William's youngest son. Both are children who find themselves trapped in dangerous animatronic-filled environments. Both have connections to Freddy, with Gregory literally hiding inside Glamrock Freddy's chest cavity. But this theory requires accepting that William Afton successfully rebuilt his son as some kind of robot child, which raises more questions than it answers. The FNAF movie, which diverged from game continuity, features a character named Garrett, whose death motivates much of the plot. Some wondered if this represented Scott's way of finally revealing the crying child's name through an alternate continuity, but the differences between Garrett's story and the crying child's make this unlikely to be a direct confirmation. What makes the name Mystery particularly frustrating is that it shouldn't be this hard. The crying child is central to understanding the Afton family's tragedy, Michael's guilt, and potentially the origin of several supernatural phenomena in the games. Knowing his name would seem like basic information, the kind of detail that helps fans connect emotionally with the character and understand his role in the larger narrative. Yet here we are, years after FNAF 4's release, still debating whether he's called Evan, Cassidy, Chris, or something else entirely. The Chris name, incidentally, originated from a fan-made gacha series and has no canonical backing, yet it spread through parts of the community anyway, demonstrating how desperate fans were for any name to attach to this important character. Similarly, Norman appeared in some theories based on minimal evidence, another example of the community trying to fill the void left by the game's silence. Part of the problem stems from Scott's evolving approach to storytelling. Early FNAF games were more straightforward with their mysteries, providing enough clues that determined theorists could eventually solve them. But FNAF 4 marked a shift toward deeper ambiguity, toward puzzles that might not have solutions, toward a story that deliberately withheld key information. When Scott mentioned in his Steam post about FNAF 4 that no one had found the pieces, he might have been referring to details about the crying child's identity and fate that he planned to reveal, but ultimately decided to leave mysterious. The lack of a confirmed name also creates practical problems for theorists trying to discuss the character. Every theory must either choose a name and defend that choice, or awkwardly refer to the crying child, or BV throughout, making it harder to discuss his role in relation to other named characters. It's a small thing, but it accumulates over dozens of videos and forum posts, a constant reminder that this fundamental detail remains unknown. Some fans have made peace with the ambiguity, arguing that the crying child's anonymity actually enhances his tragic quality. He was overlooked in life, tormented and afraid, and even in death he remains unnamed, just another victim of his family's dysfunction. His name mattering less than what happened to him could be seen as thematically appropriate, emphasizing that his tragedy transcends individual identity. But most of the community would still prefer a clear answer. The name question intersects with so many other mysteries: Golden Freddy's possession, the survival logbook's communications, the identity of the one you should not have killed from Ultimate Custom Night. Solving any of these potentially solves others, but each theory defending one solution finds contradictory evidence complicating other aspects. It's a tangled web where pulling one thread seems to tighten others. The "I will put you back together" promise especially haunts speculation. It's delivered by the Fredbear plush, whose speaker remains a mystery, as we'll explore later. But what does it mean? The literal interpretation suggests physical reconstruction, supporting theories about William building a robot version of his son, or injecting his remnant into the fun-time animatronics. The metaphorical interpretation might mean spiritual restoration, gathering the pieces of the child's consciousness for eventual peace or revenge. Current consensus in 2025 leans toward the crying child being a separate entity from Cassidy, with many theorists accepting Evan as his likely name based on the logbook puzzles, while acknowledging the evidence remains circumstantial. But consensus doesn't mean certainty, and passionate debate continues over whether BV became Golden Freddy alongside Cassidy, whether he became Shadow Freddy, or whether he moved on without possessing anything. The week before, an official visual novel released in 2023 introduced characters that some hoped might shed light on the crying child's identity through parallel storytelling. But while it confirmed details about other missing children, it frustratingly avoided addressing the crying child directly, suggesting Steelwool Studios and Scott have consciously chosen to preserve this mystery even as other questions get answered. What we're left with is a character whose trauma and death fundamentally shaped the franchise's events, but whose basic identity remains frustratingly unclear. We know more about Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz, the missing children incident victims with relatively minor roles, than we know about the boy whose birthday party went so horribly wrong, whose fear defined FNAF 4's atmosphere, whose fate motivated his family's worst actions. This central absence, this deliberately maintained mystery, represents either a storytelling choice to emphasize tragedy's impersonal nature, or an abandoned plot thread that never got properly resolved as the franchise evolved beyond its original scope. Either way, the crying child's name and ultimate fate remain among FNAF's most enduring mysteries, a question that might never receive a definitive answer, leaving theorists to argue over logbook clues and gravestones and word associations, searching for pieces that might not fit together anymore, trying to put together a child who was promised restoration, but may be destined to remain forever fragmented in the community's understanding. The Fredbear plush's true voice. Throughout Five Nights at Freddy's 4's minigame sequences, one element appears with unnerving consistency: a golden Fredbear plush that seems to follow the crying child wherever he goes. This isn't just a favorite toy, appearing in various locations as a comfort object. The plush speaks, delivering messages that range from seemingly protective warnings to ominous threats, creating one of the franchise's most debated mysteries. Who is actually talking through this innocent-looking toy? The plush's dialogue establishes it as an active presence rather than the child's imagination. "You know what will happen if he catches you," it tells the crying child, referring to animatronics or perhaps something more sinister. "Tomorrow is another day," it offers during moments of distress. Words that could be comforting or could be delaying an inevitable confrontation. Most crucially, in the hospital room scene after the bite, the plush speaks what might be the franchise's most analyzed line. "Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. I'm sorry. You're broken. I will put you back together." This final message differs from the plush's previous dialogue in a crucial way. The text appears in a different color, suggesting a different speaker. Throughout the minigames, the plush's words appear in yellow text. But in the hospital scene, the text shifts. Some players see this as evidence that the plush has been speaking with multiple voices, or that the hospital message comes from someone else entirely, perhaps someone physically present rather than speaking through the toy. The most popular theory identifies William Afton as the speaker. Evidence supporting this interpretation includes the strategic placement of Fredbear plushes throughout the FNAF 4 house and locations, far more than one child would reasonably own, which suggests they might not be personal toys, but surveillance equipment. In the minigames, a flower appears on the plush in some scenes, but disappears in others, possibly indicating when the camera speaker is active. The plush seems to watch the child constantly, appearing in his bedroom, outside Fredbear's, and in other locations where a toy shouldn't logically be. This interpretation casts William as a father who monitors his son obsessively. perhaps studying his fear responses as part of his twisted experiments, or attempting to control his movements to keep him away from certain locations. The warnings take on a sinister tone under this reading, not a protector trying to keep the child safe, but a manipulator heightening fear while pretending to care. The promise to put you back together would then represent William's determination to resurrect his son through remnant experimentation, a goal that might explain his later actions with the fun-time animatronics and injecting remnant into machinery. However, problems arise with the William theory. Why would William go to such lengths to monitor a son he apparently neglects otherwise? The FNAF 4 minigames show Michael bullying his brother without parental intervention, suggesting an absent or uncaring father rather than one obsessively watching through camera-equipped plushies. Additionally, some of the plush's warnings seem genuinely protective, trying to keep the child away from danger, which doesn't align with William's characterization as a callous murderer willing to use his own daughter for experiments that killed her. An alternative theory suggests Henry Emily speaks through the plush. This would align with Henry's characterization as genuinely caring about children's safety, perhaps monitoring William's son after noticing concerning behavior from his business partner. Henry's daughter Charlotte becomes the puppet, whose entire existence centers on protecting children, so it would fit thematically for Henry to have tried protecting the crying child before his daughter's death. The promise to put you back together could represent Henry's pledge to bring the child back through the puppet's powers, though this interpretation requires significant leaps in understanding how possession and remnant work in the FNAF universe. Some theorists propose that the plush's speaker changes throughout the minigames. William might use it for surveillance and manipulation during most scenes, but the hospital message could come from someone else. Perhaps the crying child's mother, perhaps Henry, perhaps even Charlotte's spirit, if we accept non-linear timeline theories. The text color change supports this reading, suggesting that whoever spoke through the plush during the minigames isn't the same person making the final promise. A more supernatural interpretation suggests the Fredbear plush itself becomes possessed or represents something beyond simple technology. Perhaps it's connected to the Golden Freddy entity, serving as a physical anchor for that spirit. Or perhaps it's the manifestation of the crying child's psychic projection, his fear and trauma, creating a voice that speaks to him through an object he associates with both comfort and terror. This theory fits with FNAF's established supernatural elements, but requires accepting that the plush's dialogue exists on a different level than the technology-based explanations. The Shadow Freddy theory proposes a connection between the plush and this mysterious entity. Shadow Freddy appears in FNAF 3's minigames, leading the animatronics to their destruction, acting as what Henry calls one final trick to lure them into position. If Shadow Freddy represents some aspect of the crying child's spirit or trauma, the plush could be an earlier manifestation, the first appearance of an entity that would later take animatronic form. This would explain the plush's seemingly contradictory nature, both protective and threatening, both warning against danger and perhaps leading toward it. The "I will put you back together" promise specifically has spawned countless interpretations. Literal readings suggest physical reconstruction, supporting theories about William building a robot child or injecting remnant into machines. Metaphorical readings interpret it as spiritual restoration, gathering the pieces of a fractured soul for eventual peace. Some see it as a lie. empty words from a manipulator never intending to follow through. Others view it as a promise that did get fulfilled through whichever animatronic the crying child's spirit inhabits, if any. The flower detail on the plush deserves particular attention. In several minigame scenes, the Fredbear plush clearly displays a purple flower on its chest. In other scenes, including some where the plush speaks, the flower is conspicuously absent. This could be an animation inconsistency, but given how carefully Scott Cawthon typically uses visual details, many theorists believe the flower's presence or absence communicates something important. Perhaps it indicates when the camera is active. Perhaps it shows when the plush is truly talking, versus when the child imagines it speaking. Perhaps different plushes exist, some monitored and some genuine toys. The FNAF novel trilogy provides some context, though its separate continuity means details can't be directly imported into game lore. In the books, the Ella doll serves a similar function to the Fredbear plush, and we learn about William's use of sound illusion discs that create hallucinations. Could the plush be equipped with such technology, making the crying child see and hear things beyond simple surveillance? This might explain why he fears animatronics so intensely. If William has been using the plush to project frightening illusions as part of his experiments on fear that we see elaborated in the underground facility. Some particularly creative theories suggest the plush's speaker isn't anyone from the time period at all. What if a future character projects consciousness backward through time or technological means? What if the plush connects to the digital realm introduced in Help Wanted, with an AI or digital consciousness communicating with the child? These theories require accepting time travel or advanced technology existing in the 1980s setting. But FNAF has introduced stranger concepts in its later entries. The Ultimate Custom Night adds another layer. The Fredbear character in that game has voice lines that might hint at the plush's speaker. "Let me put you back together, then take you apart all over again," Fredbear says, directly referencing the hospital promise. This could support William as the speaker, given that UCN represents William's personal hell. But it could also be a taunt from the vengeful spirit tormenting him, throwing his own words back at him mockingly. Current community consensus remains divided, with no single theory commanding majority support. William Afton, as the speaker, probably has the most adherents, fitting with his characterization and explaining the surveillance setup. But significant portions of the fanbase support Henry, support supernatural explanations, or maintain that we simply don't have enough information to determine the speaker's identity conclusively. What's particularly frustrating about this mystery is that revealing the speaker would illuminate so many other questions. If Williams spoke through the plush, it confirms his obsessive monitoring and experimental mindset toward his own children. If Henry spoke, it recontextualizes their partnership and suggests Henry knew more about William's nature earlier than generally assumed. If supernatural forces spoke, it changes our understanding of how possession and spirits work in this universe. The speaker's identity isn't just a trivial detail, but a key that could unlock understanding of family dynamics, timeline questions, and the nature of consciousness in the FNAF world. Some fans argue we might never get a definitive answer because Scott himself might not have decided. FNAF 4's original story, whatever it was meant to reveal, got abandoned or evolved beyond its initial conception. The plush speaker might have been clearly defined in that original vision, but as the franchise grew and changed direction, the detail became less important to resolve. Later games focused on new mysteries rather than explaining every ambiguous element from earlier entries. The promise to put the crying child back together tantalizes because it suggests ongoing narrative importance. If that promise was kept, how? If it remains unfulfilled, why mention it so prominently? The line seems too significant to be mere characterization flavor. Yet years of additional games haven't clearly shown the promise's fulfillment or explained what form putting back together actually took. In the end, the Fredbear plush represents FNAF's approach to ambiguity at its most maddening. We know the plush speaks. We hear its words. We see it positioned throughout the minigames. But the fundamental question of who's actually talking remains unanswered, potentially unanswerable. A voice speaking from the shadows that might represent William's control, Henry's concern, supernatural influence, or something else entirely. The plush watches, the plush warns, the plush promises, but its true nature stays forever just out of reach. Another piece of the FNAF 4 puzzle that refuses to fit neatly into place no matter how the community tries to force it. Shadow Freddy, an RWQFCSFASSXLI, the inexplicable shadows among Five Nights at Freddy's many mysteries. Few are as simultaneously prominent and unexplained as the shadow animatronics. These entities appear across multiple games, significantly impact key plot moments, yet remain almost completely unexplained in terms of origin, nature, and purpose. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, the latter officially named RWQFCSXC in one of the franchise's most deliberately unpronounceable character names, exist in a liminal space between physical animatronics, supernatural phenomena, and glitch-like manifestations, defying easy categorization and resisting all attempts at definitive explanation. Shadow Bonnie made its first appearance in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, emerging as an exceedingly rare Easter egg with supposedly 1 in a million odds, though analysis of the game's code suggested the actual probability closer to 1 in 16,184. Players would occasionally see a pitch-black, silhouette version of Toy Bonnie standing in the office, with only glowing white eyes and teeth visible against the darkness. Staring at this apparition too long caused the entire game to crash on PC versions or freeze on mobile, creating genuine fear beyond normal gameplay mechanics. This wasn't a jump scare you could recover from. Shadow Bonnie's appearance literally ended your session, forcing you to restart. The character's name, found in the game files, became part of FNAF's identity. RWQSSFASSXC. Fans attempted various pronunciations, with Rikwu Fisfaz Kiss being one popular interpretation, though most simply called it RXQ or Shadow Bonnie for practicality. When FNAF World released, Scott leaned into the joke with RWQFSFASXC's loading screen message, "Say my name." This acknowledged the absurdity, while offering no explanation for the random letter string or what the character actually represented. Shadow Freddy appeared even earlier, in the original FNAF's Fourth Night, though many players didn't notice this subtle presence. A purple-tinted Freddy variant would occasionally appear in the parts service room when checking cameras, completely non-threatening but distinctly present. This shadow version returned in FNAF 2 with similar characteristics: dark purple coloring, non-aggressive behavior, appearing in specific camera locations without directly attacking. But Shadow Freddy's true significance emerged in FNAF 3, where it played a crucial role in William Afton's fate. During the minigames showing past events, Shadow Freddy appears to lead each of the original animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, to the back room, one by one. The animatronics follow this dark doppelganger, possibly mistaking it for a familiar figure, until all have been lured to the location where William dismantles them. Henry's final speech in FNAF 6 references "a wound first inflicted on me," and mentions William using one final trick to lead the spirits to destruction, likely referring to Shadow Freddy's luring role. But what is Shadow Freddy? Why does it help William? Why would the possessed animatronics follow it? Theories about the Shadow's origins have multiplied over the years, each attempting to explain these inexplicable entities. The springlock failure theory proved popular early on. Phone Guy mentions in FNAF 3 that simultaneous springlock failures at a sister location caused the suits to be deemed unsafe. Some theorize these failures killed employees who became the Shadow animatronics, dark remnants of trauma infused into the space around the suits. This would make Shadow Freddy tied to Fredbear and Shadow Bonnie to Spring Bonnie, explaining their forms and their connection to past tragedies. However, this theory struggles with several problems. Why would springlock victims become shadows rather than possessing suits like other spirits? What makes their manifestations so different from the missing children or Charlotte's possessions? The theory requires accepting a completely distinct type of haunting with no clear explanation for why springlock deaths would produce this result versus other deaths at Fazbear locations. The Dark Remnant theory emerged from a FNAF AR, Special Delivery, which introduced the concept of Dark Remnant as opposed to regular Remnant. In this game, collecting too much Dark Remnant summons RWQFSLFVS suggesting a direct connection between the Shadow animatronics and this substance. The Fazbear Fright story, Blackbird, describes Dark Remnant as being formed from intense negative emotions, particularly agony, taking physical form without needing a soul to possess it. If we apply this book concept to the games, it would offer an explanation. The shadows aren't possessed by specific individuals, but are manifestations of accumulated trauma and pain from Freddy's locations, coalescing into animatronic-shaped entities. This theory elegantly explains their inhuman nature and their glitch-like appearances. They're not ghosts following typical possession rules, but something more primal, emotion-given form, agony walking. It explains why Shadow Bonnie crashes games or blacks out screens. It's disrupting reality itself. A digital manifestation of corruption and suffering. Shadow Freddy's purple coloring could represent its connection to William's murders, literally formed from the agony his actions created. But significant questions remain. If shadows are Dark Remnant manifestations, why do they take specific animatronic forms? Why Freddy and Bonnie specifically? Why does Shadow Freddy appear to cooperate with William, leading the animatronics to destruction? Dark Remnant formed from William's victim's suffering helping William seems contradictory, unless Shadow Freddy represents something more complex, perhaps William's own guilt or trauma taking form, or a manifestation of his victim's pain that he somehow controls. The two employees' theory suggests Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie represent specific individuals who died in the Springlock failures, perhaps through employees being helped into the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie suits, as glimpsed in the FNAF 4 minigame showing what appears to be a worker assisting another with a suit head. This would make the shadows the first victims of Fazbear Entertainment's dangerous technology, predating even Charlotte's death. Their shadowy nature could represent being forgotten, written out of company history, existing as dark impressions rather than acknowledged victims. Some theorists connect Shadow Freddy specifically to the crying child, suggesting his trauma and death created this dark entity. This would explain Shadow Freddy's presence in FNAF 3, potentially representing the crying child's desire to end the cycle by leading the animatronics to William, allowing them to extract revenge. It would also explain why Shadow Freddy appears in the FNAF 4 house during certain minigames. It's the crying child's fear given form, manifesting where his trauma was strongest. RWQSF FASXC received additional story in the Fazbear Fright's Tale Hide and Seek, where a teenager named Toby encounters the entity through an arcade game. In this story, Shadow Bonnie attaches itself to Toby, feeding on his anger and competitive rage, growing stronger as his negative emotions intensify. The story portrays Shadow Bonnie as a parasitic entity drawn to and sustained by intense negative emotions, eventually becoming substantial enough to manifest physically. This aligns with the Dark Remnant theory, presenting shadows as emotional parasites or accumulated anger finding form. The story also shows Shadow Bonnie being defeated when Toby recognizes what's happening and releases his anger, suggesting these entities require negative emotions to maintain their existence. This could explain their appearances throughout the games. Shadow Bonnie manifests where fear and trauma concentrate, feeding on the terror soaked into Freddy's locations. Shadow Freddy similarly appears where William's murders and experiments created agony, perhaps drawn to or formed from those locations' accumulated suffering. FNAF 3's minigame Stage 01 features RWQFSFASXC in a particularly mysterious context. The shadow navigates through glitched areas, eventually making contact with what appears to be the crying child in a purple void space, causing a birthday cake to appear. This moment connects to the Happiest Day minigame, suggesting RWWQFSSFASXC plays a role in freeing the child spirits. Unlike Shadow Freddy's apparent cooperation with William, Shadow Bonnie seems benevolent here, helping achieve the good ending rather than causing harm. This adds another layer of confusion. Are the shadows evil, neutral, or possibly even helpful despite their frightening appearances? The question of whether Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie represent the same type of entity remains open. They appear differently, behave differently, and seem to serve different narrative functions. Shadow Freddy actively manipulates events in FNAF 3, while Shadow Bonnie mostly appears as an occasional disruption. Could they represent different classes of phenomenon, different types of Dark Remnant, or different specific origins despite similar appearances? Current consensus leans toward Dark Remnant as the explanation, with many theorists accepting that the Blackbird story's description of agony-formed entities applies to the game shadows. This makes them manifestations of accumulated trauma rather than specific individuals, explaining their strange properties and their ability to affect digital systems. But consensus doesn't mean certainty, and passionate debate continues over whether they were ever human, whether they're truly independent entities or controlled by someone, and what their ultimate purpose is. The Shadow's ability to affect technology particularly interests theorists. Shadow Bonnie crashing games in FNAF 2, both shadows appearing in digital spaces like FNAF 3's minigames, and Shadow Bonnie's connection to Dark Remnant Collection in AR, all suggest they exist partially in digital realms. This could foreshadow later entries' focus on digital consciousness and viruses like Glitchtrap, hinting that agony and trauma can infect digital systems just as Remnant allows souls to possess physical objects. What makes these mysteries particularly frustrating is how prominently the shadows appear throughout the franchise. These aren't minor Easter eggs or background details. Shadow Freddy directly facilitates a crucial plot moment in FNAF 3. Shadow Bonnie appears across multiple games and receives its own story in the book series. Yet after all these appearances, we still can't definitively answer what they are, where they came from, or why they exist. Some fans embrace this ambiguity, arguing the shadows represent FNAF's commitment to maintaining inexplicable elements, things that resist categorization and explanation. Not everything needs to make logical sense. Sometimes horror benefits from entities that simply are, that exist without clear origin, that operate on rules we don't fully understand. The shadows' very inexplicability makes them unsettling in ways that explained entities lose. But most of the community would still prefer clarity. The shadows intersect with too many important plot points to remain completely unexplained. Shadow Freddy's role in FNAF 3 needs context to understand William's fate properly. Shadow Bonnie's connection to Happiest Day needs explanation to understand how the good ending gets achieved. Their nature informs our understanding of how possession, remnant, and consciousness work in FNAF's universe. As of 2025, new games continue referencing the shadows without explaining them. The Ruin DLC for Security Breach features shadow-like entities, suggesting the concept remains relevant. But whether we'll ever receive a definitive answer about what the shadows truly are, where they came from, and why they exist remains questionable. Like so many FNAF mysteries, the shadows might remain forever in their namesake state. Entities existing in darkness, visible enough to know they're there but never fully illuminated. Their true nature lost in the spaces between what we can see and what we can understand. Golden Freddy's Dual Soul Mystery. Few animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's carry as much significance and generate as much debate as Golden Freddy. This mysterious entity has appeared in nearly every mainline game, always with unsettling properties that set it apart from other animatronics. It teleports rather than walking through doors. It appears as a slumped, lifeless suit one moment and a full-bodied entity the next. It can cause hallucinations, crashes, and reality-bending effects. And at the core of ongoing debate lies a crucial question. Is Golden Freddy possessed by one spirit or two? The character first appeared in the original FNAF as an Easter egg. Rarely, when checking a specific camera, players would see a poster on the wall transform into a close-up image of a Golden Freddy head. Lowering the monitor revealed a slumped golden bear animatronic sitting in the office, and moments later, a unique jump scare would end the run. Unlike other animatronics, Golden Freddy could be made to disappear by quickly pulling the monitor back up, and in one recorded instance, the game crashes entirely after its appearance. This established Golden Freddy as fundamentally different from the physical animatronics players spent nights defending against. Golden Freddy continued appearing in FNAF 2, where it could manifest in the office as a floating head or a full suit. In FNAF 3, it appeared in minigames associated with the Happiest Day good ending, positioned as the final child receiving cake, and seemingly central to freeing the trapped spirits. Sister Location revealed the name Cassidy through cryptic Easter eggs, and the survival logbook confirmed this name belonged to Golden Freddy's spirit. Ultimate Custom Night positioned Golden Freddy as the primary antagonist. The vengeful spirit tormenting William Afton with endless versions of the animatronics he'd created and corrupted. But here's where the mystery deepens. Evidence suggests Golden Freddy might house not one, but two souls simultaneously. With Cassidy being one, and the crying child potentially being the other. This golden duo or golden both theory has become one of the most contentious debates in the FNAF community, with compelling evidence on both sides and significant implications for understanding the timeline, character motivations, and the nature of possession itself. The case for two souls starts with the survival logbook, that mysterious security guard's journal filled with puzzles and hidden messages. The book contains what appears to be a conversation between two distinct entities. Faded text asks questions throughout the book, while altered text provides responses. The faded text asks things like, "What do you remember?" and "Do you have dreams?" The altered text circles specific images, including a picture of the Nightmare Fredbear animatronic from FNAF 4, and uses number puzzles to potentially spell out names. Theorists interpret this as two spirits communicating, one asking questions and one answering. The questioner seems to be Cassidy, trying to understand the other spirit's trauma and memories. The responder seems to be the crying child, whose memories revolve around the Nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4, and whose trauma centers on Fredbear specifically. If both spirits communicate through this logbook, and if the logbook is associated with Golden Freddy as suggested by various clues, then both spirits might inhabit Golden Freddy together. Additional evidence comes from FNAF 3's good ending sequence. During the Happiest Day minigame, we see 5 children receiving cake from the puppet, with Golden Freddy receiving cake last. But if we count the victims, we get the 5 missing children incident victims: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, plus Charlotte, the puppet, plus the crying child. That's 7 spirits, not 5. If the crying child shares Golden Freddy with Cassidy, it resolves this counting issue, explaining why Golden Freddy receives special positioning as the final child freed, despite Cassidy being one of the original 5 victims. The bad ending of FNAF 3 provides visual evidence that fans dissected extensively when examining Golden Freddy's head among the other animatronic heads. Some players claim to see 2 lights in Golden Freddy's eyes rather than 1, suggesting 2 spirits inside. However, careful analysis revealed this might be a lighting effect, with 1 light illuminating multiple areas of the head's interior. The evidence remains ambiguous, capable of supporting either interpretation, depending on how carefully one examines the pixel art. Sister Location introduced the concept of multiple spirits sharing one animatronic body through Enard, which combined several Funtime animatronics and their possessing spirits into a single entity. If multiple souls can inhabit one animatronic, as clearly demonstrated by Enard, then Golden Freddy housing 2 souls becomes mechanically possible within the franchise's established rules. The Fazbear Fright stories reinforce this with the Stitch Wraith, an endoskeleton possessed simultaneously by Andrew, Jake, and possibly William Afton, each spirit occupying different components but sharing the same physical form. The week before, an official visual novel presented an intriguing scene. On night 5, if players take certain actions, they're attacked by Golden Freddy in a way that suggests dual consciousness. The attack seems to come from 2 distinct motivations or perspectives, as if 2 entities coordinate or struggle for control. While this evidence remains interpretive rather than explicit, it adds to the accumulating suggestion that Golden Freddy operates differently from single spirit possessions. Ultimate Custom Nights mechanics provide some of the strongest evidence. The game features both Withered Golden Freddy and Fredbear as separate characters with different behaviors and voice lines. When players use a death coin on Withered Golden Freddy set to difficulty 1 with all other characters at 0, Fredbear appears instead, with an unusually aggressive jump scare. This could suggest the two forms represent different spirits sharing the suit, with Fredbear representing the crying child, and Golden Freddy representing Cassidy, both manifesting in William's nightmare because both have reasons to torment him. The "one you should not have killed" voice in UCN presents another puzzle. The voice is male, referring to the vengeful spirit as he in the game's credits and various descriptions. But if Cassidy is widely accepted as female based on the logbook's illustration of a black-haired girl receiving cake, who is the male voice? Some theorists argue this is the crying child, suggesting his spirit shares Golden Freddy with Cassidy, and his rage toward his father contributes to UCN's creation. Others argue Andrew from the Fazbear Fright stories represents a parallel to the game's vengeful spirit, possibly even being canon to the games despite originating in the books. However, significant evidence contradicts the dual soul theory. Golden Freddy's famous catchphrase "It's me" uses singular pronouns, suggesting one identity rather than two. The Give Gifts, Give Life minigame in FNAF 2 shows the puppet bringing life to 4 children. Then a 5th child appears, and Golden Freddy jump scares the player. This sequence suggests one spirit entering Golden Freddy, not 2. When counting graves in FNAF 6's good ending, we see 6 graves representing Charlotte and the 5 missing children incident victims, with no indication of the crying child's grave being among them, suggesting he rests elsewhere or his spirit took a different form. The Follow Me minigames in FNAF 3 show 5 spirits confronting William, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. Where is the crying child's spirit during this confrontation? If he shares Golden Freddy, why doesn't he appear? If he doesn't share Golden Freddy, where is he? This absence creates problems for the dual soul theory, unless we accept that the crying child's spirit can be present in Golden Freddy, but not manifest visually in these key moments. Some theorists propose that while Golden Freddy contains 2 souls, only Cassidy actively controls the suit, while the crying child remains a passive presence, unable to see or directly interact, but somehow influencing Golden Freddy's behavior. This parallels the Stitch Wraith, where Jake controls the body, while Andrew inhabits a battery component without seeing. But this interpretation requires accepting very specific mechanics of how possession works, mechanics the games never explicitly confirm. The Golden Victim theory suggests the crying child alone possesses Golden Freddy, with Cassidy being a separate entity or possessing a different animatronic. This theory points to thematic parallels between the crying child's death involving Fredbear and the Golden Freddy's appearance, suggesting direct connection. The "I will put you back together" promise could refer to the crying child's spirit being placed into Golden Freddy. However, this theory struggles to explain Cassidy's clear association with Golden Freddy through the logbook and UCN evidence. The Golden Cassidy theory argues Cassidy alone possesses Golden Freddy, with the crying child either possessing something else entirely, Shadow Freddy being a popular candidate, or moving on without possessing anything. This theory fits neatly with the missing children incident, establishing 5 victims and 5 main animatronics, including Golden Freddy. But it requires explaining away the survival logbook's apparent 2-spirit conversation and finding alternative explanations for various pieces of evidence suggesting dual possession. As of 2025, the community remains split. Polls on major FNAF forums show roughly 60% favoring some version of the dual soul theory, with the remaining 40% divided between single soul theories and those who consider the question unanswerable with current evidence. The debate persists because compelling evidence exists for multiple interpretations, and no single theory accounts for all data points without requiring some evidence to be dismissed or reinterpreted. What makes this mystery particularly significant is how it affects understanding of other plot elements. If Golden Freddy houses two souls, it fundamentally changes our interpretation of Ultimate Custom Night, the happiest day ending, the nature of the crying child's fate, and the mechanics of possession in the FNAF universe. If Golden Freddy houses only Cassidy, it means the crying child's story takes a completely different trajectory, potentially possessing a different entity or achieving resolution through means we haven't identified. The dual soul question also intersects with security breach mysteries. Some theorists suggest Gregory might be connected to the crying child or Golden Freddy, potentially as a rebuilt version or a spiritual successor. If the crying child shares Golden Freddy with Cassidy, and if Gregory has some connection to this history, it could explain various unexplained elements of Security Breach's plot. But these connections remain speculative, built on theories stacked upon theories without solid confirmation. Scott Cawthon has never directly addressed the Golden Freddy possession question, leaving it as one of those mysteries he's comfortable maintaining ambiguity around. Steelwool Studios' recent games continue featuring Golden Freddy in various forms, without clarifying the possession mechanics, suggesting the mystery serves the franchise better than a definitive answer might. Perhaps that's the real truth of Golden Freddy. It's meant to be ambiguous, meant to be mysterious, meant to be the one animatronic that defies explanation, even as everything around it gets gradually clarified. Whether housing one soul or two, Golden Freddy represents something fundamental about FNAF's approach to storytelling, leaving spaces for interpretation, maintaining questions that theories can revolve around endlessly, creating a core mystery that fuels discussion rather than resolving neatly. The question of Golden Freddy's souls might never receive a definitive answer, and perhaps in the franchise's strange way. That's exactly as it should be. William Afton's true motivations. In any horror franchise, understanding why the villain does what they do is crucial for making sense of the narrative. But in Five Nights at Freddy's, despite William Afton being the primary antagonist across nearly every game and being directly responsible for the majority of tragedies that unfold, his actual motivations remain frustratingly unclear. We know what he did: murdered children, experimented with Remnant, built animatronics designed to capture and kill. But the crucial question of why he did all this has never received a satisfying, comprehensive answer that accounts for all his actions. The simplest reading paints William as a pure psychopath who kills because he enjoys it, a serial killer motivated by the same dark urges that drive real-world monsters. The FNAF 6 ending describes him as showing no remorse, and the security puppet minigame appears to show Charlotte's death occurring early in the timeline, which has led many to interpret her as William's first victim. The methodical way he lures and murders children in the missing children incident suggests someone who planned carefully and derived satisfaction from the act. His return as Springtrap and his apparent creation of Glitchtrap suggests someone who cannot stop, whose evil persists beyond death because it's fundamental to his nature. This interpretation has support in the game's portrayal of William as callous and remorseless. He shows no hesitation in using his own daughter Elizabeth as an unwitting test subject for Circus Baby, knowing the animatronic was designed to capture children, but apparently willing to accept her death as collateral damage in his experiments. He builds an entire underground facility dedicated to testing children with fear experiments, subjecting vulnerable kids to prolonged psychological torture. These actions suggest someone without empathy, someone for whom other people exist as objects to be used and discarded. However, this simple, "he's just evil" explanation doesn't account for certain aspects of William's behavior. Why did he partner with Henry Emily to create family-friendly entertainment in the first place? Why establish Fredbear's Family Diner and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza if his goal was always murder? Why go through the elaborate technical work of creating functioning animatronics and building a successful business? A pure psychopath could kill without needing the infrastructure of entertainment venues and mechanical mascots. The remnant motivation theory suggests William discovered the supernatural properties of remnant, the substance formed when spirits possess objects, and became obsessed with achieving immortality. Under this reading, his first murder of Charlotte might have been opportunistic or motivated by jealousy of Henry's family. But when Charlotte's spirit possessed the puppet, William realized death could be transcended. This sparked an obsession with replicating the phenomenon, leading to the missing children incident, where he deliberately murdered children to create possessed animatronics he could study. This theory gained support from his actions in the FNAF 3 minigames, where he dismantles the animatronics to extract their remnant-infused endoskeletons, presumably to inject that remnant into his funtime animatronics. It explains his underground facility and his experiments. He's trying to perfect the process of preserving consciousness beyond death, perhaps hoping to achieve immortality for himself. His return as Springtrap and later as Glitchtrap demonstrates he succeeded in some form, his consciousness persisting through physical death via remnant mechanics and later digital means. The bring back the crying child motivation suggests William's actions stem from grief and desperation after his youngest son's death in the Bite of 83. The Fredbear plush's promise to put him back together might represent William's vow to resurrect his son, driving him to murder other children to understand how possession works and gather remnant to potentially rebuild his son's consciousness. This would make William a tragic figure, a father driven to monstrous acts by inability to accept loss, believing that if he can master the connection between spirits and machinery, he can restore his child. This interpretation has thematic appeal, creating symmetry with Henry's grief over Charlotte's death, leading to his final actions in FNAF 6. Both fathers losing daughters, sons, both responding in drastically different ways. Henry seeking to free the trapped souls, William seeking to trap more souls to fuel his resurrection project. The crying child, potentially possessing Golden Freddy, or being rebuilt as a robotic child in later theories, could represent William's failed attempts to fulfill his promise. But problems arise with this motivation. The timeline of William's murders relative to the crying child's death remains debated in the community. If we interpret the security puppet minigame as showing Charlotte's death occurring before the Bite of 83, then William's pattern of killing would have predated his son's tragedy, suggesting other initial motivations. Additionally, William shows no particular care for his children in the FNAF 4 minigames, allowing Michael to torture the crying child without intervention and sending Elizabeth to Circus Baby despite knowing the animatronic's deadly function. These behaviors don't align well with a grief-stricken father desperate to save his child. The jealousy motivation theory proposes William envied Henry's stability and happy family life, particularly after his own wife left or died. Seeing Henry with Charlotte while William's family fell apart could have sparked resentment that culminated in Charlotte's murder. This single act of jealous rage then snowballed into a larger pattern of killing as William discovered Remnant's properties and became increasingly detached from his humanity. Each subsequent murder became easier as his moral boundaries eroded, transforming an initial crime of passion into systematic serial killing. This motivation fits certain narrative beats. The novels particularly emphasize the Henry-William friendship-turned-rivalry, with William feeling overshadowed by Henry's creativity and success. The FNAF 6 endings reference the wound William inflicted on Henry by killing Charlotte, suggesting personal targeting rather than random victim selection. William choosing Henry's daughter specifically for his first murder makes more sense under a jealousy motivation than under pure psychopathy or remnant experimentation. Some theorists propose financial motivation, William's business dealings, his establishment of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, his creation of fun-time animatronics that could be rented for parties, all suggest someone thinking about profit. Perhaps the kidnapping children aspect started as a twisted business venture, collecting children for some darker purpose, trafficking, experiments, harvesting remnant to sell. The murders would then be about business, not personal gratification or scientific curiosity, making William a calculated entrepreneur who happens to deal in the most horrific commodity imaginable. However, this theory struggles because William appears to have plenty of legitimate income from his successful entertainment ventures and robotics company, Afton Robotics. Why risk his legitimate business with illegal activities unless driven by compulsions beyond profit? The theory also doesn't explain his persistence after death, Springtrap continuing to hunt, Glitchtrap corrupting systems, behaviors that suggest deeper psychological drives than mere financial gain. The control and godhood motivation suggests William seeks ultimate power over life and death. By discovering how to trap souls in machines, he becomes a dark god figure controlling existence itself. His victims remain trapped, forced to serve his purposes, unable to move on or rest. The Remnant isn't just about immortality for himself, but about having dominion over death, controlling who lives, who dies, and who exists in the tortured state between. The fun-time animatronics become his servants, tools he's imbued with remnants stolen from murdered children, demonstrating his complete control over life's most fundamental transition. This motivation would explain his continued hunting even after death. Springtrap pursues night guards not because he needs to, but because hunting and controlling victims is fundamental to his identity. Glitchtrap, spreading through digital systems and corrupting Vanessa, represents him expanding his dominion into new realms, continuing to trap and control even without a physical body. The ultimate custom night torment represents his worst nightmare, being stripped of control, being the victim instead of the victimizer, subjected to the very suffering he inflicted on others. The books, particularly the Fazbear Fright series, provide additional context, though their canonicity to the games remains debated. The story The Man in Room 1280 shows William on life support, kept alive against nature by a vengeful spirit, suggesting his crimes created a kind of karmic debt that won't allow him to die. Stories like Coming Home explore the theme of remnant drawing spirits back, suggesting William's consciousness might be trapped in an existence he didn't choose, his murders binding him to the very places and machines he used to commit them. The novels present William as more complex, showing moments of humanity and suggestion that his evil grew gradually rather than existing as a constant. He had a family, ran businesses, presented as normal to the world. His descent into murder happened over time, influenced by circumstances and choices that compounded. This more nuanced portrayal suggests motivations beyond simple evil, perhaps mental illness, perhaps gradual moral corruption, perhaps addictive behavior where the first murder led to a need for more, spiraling into compulsive killing. Interestingly, Ultimate Custom Night's voice lines hint at William's psychology. Various animatronics reference his crimes, mock his fate, remind him of the one you should not have killed. This suggests hierarchy among his victims, that one particular murder carried more weight than others. If we accept the vengeful spirit as Cassidy or the crying child, it implies this specific death affected William differently, perhaps because killing his own son finally broke something in him, or perhaps because this particular victim possessed properties that made their spirit especially powerful. Current community consensus remains divided, with no single motivation theory commanding majority support. Many theorists accept a combination explanation. William might have started with jealousy-driven murder of Charlotte, discovered Remnant's properties, became obsessed with achieving immortality, and descended into serial killing as his humanity eroded and he became addicted to the power and control. This layered motivation accounts for the progression of his crimes while acknowledging that people's motivations evolve. What makes William's motivation particularly frustrating as an unsolved mystery is that he's the franchise's central villain. Understanding why he does what he does should be fundamental to understanding the story. Yet here we are, years into the franchise's development, still unable to definitively say why William Afton kills children, why he experiments with Remnant, why he persists beyond death. The ambiguity might be intentional, reflecting the inscrutability of real-world evil, the way actual serial killers often don't have satisfying explanations for their actions. Or it might represent incomplete storytelling, a villain whose motivations were never fully developed because Scott focused more on the mechanics of the story than the psychology. Henry's speech in FNAF 6 references a wound first inflicted on me, confirming Charlotte's murder as the start, but doesn't explain why William did it. The speech positions William as beyond redemption, someone who needs to be destroyed rather than understood, suggesting his motivations might not matter as much as stopping him. But for fans trying to make sense of the narrative, trying to understand how a father and business owner became a child-murdering experimenter in immortality, the lack of clear motivation creates a hole at the story's center that theories circle around without quite filling. Perhaps we'll never get a definitive answer. Perhaps William's motivations are meant to remain mysterious, leaving each player to interpret his actions through their own understanding of human evil. Perhaps Scott himself never settled on a single definitive motivation, allowing William's character to be driven by whatever the current story needed. Either way, the question of why William Afton does what he does remains one of FNAF's most fundamental and frustrating unsolved mysteries, a psychological puzzle at the heart of the franchise that might resist solution as stubbornly as any locked box or unnamed child. Midnight Motorist's cryptic story. Of all the lore-containing minigames across the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, none has generated more confusion, debate, and wildly divergent theories than Midnight Motorist from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, hidden behind a secret wall in the Fruity Maze arcade game. This 8-bit driving game seems straightforward until you reach its true content. A later that night sequence that might be the most deliberately cryptic piece of storytelling Scott Cawthon ever created. The minigame presents a simple scenario, but virtually every element of it remains contested, with theories ranging from straightforward family drama to complex timeline manipulation involving characters who shouldn't logically be present. The minigame begins innocently enough. Players control an orange-yellow figure driving a purple car along a road at dangerous speeds, able to reach 200 miles per hour in this pixelated racer. On the fourth lap, driving through a specific hidden gap allows access to a different area, a house surrounded by trees. But before reaching home, the driver can stop at a location marked JR's, where a green figure blocks the door, stating, "You know you can't be here. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." Arriving home, the orange driver finds a grey figure sitting in front of a television, who says simply, "Leave him alone tonight. He had a rough day." Angered, the orange figure goes to a bedroom door, demanding to be let in and threatening punishment. "This is my house. He can't ignore me like this. I'll come find you." But the door won't open. Walking around to the back of the house reveals a broken window in the bedroom. Outside the window, strange tracks appear. One set of footprints appearing human-sized, another showing three-toed animatronic prints. The orange figure concludes, "Ran off to that place again. He'll be sorry when he gets back." That's it. That's the entirety of the scene. And somehow, the community has built hundreds of conflicting theories, trying to explain who these people are, when this takes place, where that place is, and what any of it means for the larger story. Let's examine the competing interpretations and why this seemingly simple minigame has proven so resistant to definitive explanation. The most popular theory identifies the orange figure as William Afton. Supporting evidence includes the purple car, which William is shown driving in FNAF 2. The abusive behavior toward family members aligns with what we know of William's character. The title, "Later That Night" in the game files, suggests this scene occurs after another event, possibly after Charlotte's murder as shown in the Fruity Maze minigame, or after the crying child's death. Being barred from JR's, presumably a bar, suggests William has a drinking problem or has caused trouble there before, fitting with his characterization as someone whose life is falling apart. Under this interpretation, the grey figure watching television represents either Michael Afton or Mrs. Afton, whose existence remains almost completely unaddressed in the games. The child in the locked bedroom would be the crying child, who has locked himself in, possibly after witnessing something traumatic. The animatronic footprints suggest he was lured away by one of William's creations, possibly a twisted animatronic from the novel series, or a fun-time animatronic designed to capture children. That place would refer to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, explaining why the crying child appears at the restaurant in FNAF 4, despite clearly being terrified of it. William's animatronics literally fetch him. This theory ties together multiple narrative threads. It shows William as an abusive father, explaining Michael's bullying behavior as learned from their father. It demonstrates William using his animatronics to control his family, foreshadowing his later experiments. It provides context for the crying child's constant fear if he knows animatronics come to his house to drag him to places he doesn't want to go. The mound of dirt visible in a hidden area might represent where William buried one of his early victims, or even where he disposed of his wife. However, significant problems complicate this interpretation. The figure is orange, not purple, as William typically appears in minigames. While color shifts happen in FNAF's pixelated graphics, this seems like an important enough character to maintain consistent coloring. The timeline creates issues too. If this is after the crying child's death, who is the child in the bedroom? If it's before, why would William be bringing his son to Freddy's against his will, when we see the child attending birthday parties there voluntarily in FNAF 4? An alternative theory suggests the orange figure is actually Henry Emily, with this scene depicting the night of Charlotte's death. The grey figure would be Henry's wife. The child would be Sammy, Charlotte's brother from the novel trilogy, potentially canon to games. And the broken window animatronic tracks show that Sammy ran off to Freddy's to find his sister, not knowing she's already dead. Henry's behavior, drunk, angry, being refused entry to his own restaurant, reflects his mental state after losing his daughter. That place refers to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where Charlotte was murdered, and Sammy going there against his father's wishes sets up more family tragedy. This theory has appeal because it explains the orange colouring as distinct from William's purple while still involving a main character. It recontextualizes the abusive behaviour as a father destroyed by grief rather than inherent cruelty. The animatronic tracks could represent the puppet, which Charlotte possesses, possibly trying to protect or communicate with Sammy. However, this theory requires accepting Sammy as canon to the games despite never being mentioned elsewhere, and it doesn't explain why JRs would ban Henry after Charlotte's death, unless he caused a scene there. Some theorists propose the orange figure is William's father, with the scene showing William as a child. This would establish William's abusive upbringing, explaining how he became the monster we know in the main timeline. The child in the bedroom is young William. The grey figure is William's mother, and the scene demonstrates cycle of abuse dynamics that would shape William's later treatment of his own children. The animatronic tracks become more difficult to explain under this theory unless we accept that animatronics existed earlier in the timeline than generally believed, or that the tracks represent something else entirely. The mound of dirt visible in a hidden area generates its own theories. Some suggest it's a grave, possibly containing the crying child, Mrs. Afton, or an early murder victim. Others propose it's where a twisted animatronic hides, emerging at night to hunt. Some theorists connected it to the FNAF 4 locked box, suggesting William buried the box there to keep it hidden. The twisted animatronic theory gained support from the novel trilogy, describing these creatures digging into the ground and hiding in dirt, though importing book concepts directly into game lore remains controversial. The identity of that place causes particular debate. Most assume it's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but which location? The FNAF 4 Fredbear's Family Diner? The FNAF 2 location? An unspecified sister location? Or could that place be something else entirely? The underground facility where William conducts experiments? Or somewhere the animatronics take victims? The animatronic footprints suggest wherever it is has animatronic presence, but that could describe multiple locations across the timeline. The three-toed footprints specifically intrigue theorists. Most animatronics in FNAF have different foot designs, but 3 toes appear prominently on certain characters. Twisted animatronics from the novels have 3-toed feet. Some Funtime animatronics display similar designs. The tracks being larger than human footprints suggests a substantial animatronic, ruling out smaller characters. The presence of both human and animatronic tracks implies someone in a costume or an animatronic following, carrying someone, adding another layer of mystery. The "he had a rough day" comment from the television watcher raises questions. What happened to make it a rough day? Is this after the bite of 83, with the child recovering from trauma? Is it after witnessing one of William's murders? Is it simply after being bullied by Michael? The comment suggests whatever happened was significant enough to merit the request to leave the child alone. Yet the orange figure dismisses this concern angrily, showing either lack of empathy or believing the child needs discipline rather than sympathy. The JR's location presents its own puzzle. The sign reads, just JR's, without clarification of what kind of establishment it is. The presence of what appears to be a bouncer or doorman suggests it could be a bar, club, or restaurant. Some theorists proposed it's Junior's, possibly owned by or named after Henry's son, Henry Jr., though this remains speculative. Others suggest it's unrelated to the main characters, simply a local establishment where the orange figure has been banned. The green figure's phrasing, "You know you can't be here," implies ongoing conflict, suggesting the orange figure has tried entering multiple times despite being barred. The house design sparked analysis too. Some compared it to layouts from the novels, trying to determine if it matches the Afton house, Emily house, or somewhere new. The presence of a television, separate bedrooms, and the outdoor mound suggests a modest family home. But pixel art limitations make precise architectural matching difficult, and small houses in minigames might not correspond exactly to locations described elsewhere. The file name "later that night" is crucial. Later than what? Later than Fruity Maze showing Charlotte's death? Later than FNAF 4's minigames? Later than the missing children incident? The phrase implies connection to other events, but which ones? Different timeline placements completely change the scene's meaning and implications, affecting how we understand character relationships and story progression. Some creative theories propose the minigame isn't literal but symbolic, representing emotional states or relationship dynamics rather than actual events. The locked door might symbolize emotional distance between William and his son. The animatronic tracks might represent William's creations figuratively, taking his family away from him as his obsession grows. The orange coloring might indicate William in a moment. We're not supposed to recognize him immediately, hiding his identity until we piece together context. These symbolic readings offer flexibility, but sacrifice narrative clarity. The recent FNAF movie featured scenes reminiscent of Midnight Motorist, with William's house and family dynamics receiving more development. Some fans hoped this might clarify the minigame's meaning through parallel storytelling, but the movie's separate continuity means direct connections remain speculative. Still, the movie's exploration of William as a father figure who abuses and manipulates his children reinforces interpretations of Midnight Motorist showing Afton family dysfunction. Current consensus remains frustratingly divided. Polls suggest roughly 70% favor the orange guy is William interpretation, with the remaining 30% split between Henry, William's father, or admitting the scene is too ambiguous to interpret confidently. Even among those who accept William as the orange figure, debate rages over when the scene occurs, who the other characters are, and what that place refers to. What makes Midnight Motorist particularly maddening is that Scott Cawthon included it in FNAF 6 specifically to provide lore clarification. FNAF 6 was meant to wrap up loose threads and provide answers, yet it introduced one of the most confusing minigames in the entire series. Either Scott underestimated how cryptic the scene was, or he deliberately maintained ambiguity for artistic reasons. His later comments about FNAF 4 being too ambiguous, and sister location SHA FNAF 6 being intended to clarify things suggest the former, implying Midnight Motorist contains important information we're simply failing to pass correctly. The minigame demonstrates FNAF's double-edged approach to mystery. By presenting scenes with minimal context and dialogue, Scott creates puzzle-like narratives that reward careful analysis, but push ambiguity too far, and you get Midnight Motorist, a scene so deliberately cryptic that it resists definitive interpretation, generating dozens of theories but no clear answers. The community has effectively reverse-engineered multiple possible scenarios that all fit the available evidence to some degree, yet none fit perfectly without requiring some details to be ignored or reinterpreted. As of 2025, Midnight Motorist remains exactly what it was when discovered: a cryptic window into family dysfunction, possible abuse, animatronic manipulation, and hints about major characters' relationships, all presented through 8-bit graphics and minimal dialogue that raises more questions than it answers. Perhaps future games or books will provide context that makes the scene suddenly clear in retrospect. Perhaps Scott intended it as an unsolvable mood piece. Or perhaps somewhere in those pixelated graphics and sparse dialogue lies a clear answer that the community has simply failed to see, hidden in the last place we'd think to look, waiting for some future theorist to finally crack the code and explain what really happens on that night, in that house, with those mysterious footprints leading away into the darkness. The security logbooks, hidden communications. When the survival logbook released alongside FNAF 6's Steam port, fans initially dismissed it as merchandise, a fun collectible recreating the security guard notebooks mentioned in the games, filled with jokes and Easter eggs, but unlikely to contain serious lore. That assumption proved spectacularly wrong. The logbook turned out to be one of the franchise's most important lore documents, containing elaborate puzzles, hidden messages, and what appears to be a conversation between two spirits communicating across the pages. Yet despite years of intense analysis, the book's mysteries remain only partially solved, with crucial questions about identity, meaning, and timeline still generating passionate debate. The logbook presents itself as a security guard's handbook for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, filled with workplace humor, safety questions, and casual comments, typical of such materials. But hidden throughout its pages are messages written in 3 distinct styles: printed text that's part of the original book, faded text that appears subtly on the various pages, and altered text where printed words have been changed or images modified. The interaction between these 3 text types creates a complex puzzle that requires reading the entire book multiple times, comparing pages, and following elaborate clue chains to extract hidden information. The faded text asks questions throughout the book. What do you see? What is your name? Do you have dreams? What do you remember? These queries seem directed at someone, seeking information about their identity and experiences. The altered text appears to respond. Circled images show a balloon, a character that says my name, a gravestone, and various other elements that might spell out answers through complex decoding. The most famous alteration shows a page asking, "What do you remember?" with someone circling an image of Nightmare Fredbear, suggesting whoever altered the text has memories specifically connected to that animatronic and the trauma it represents. Theorists immediately recognize this as a conversation, 2 spirits communicating through the only medium available to them, a physical book that somehow connects their consciousnesses. But who are these spirits? The current consensus identifies one as Cassidy, the missing children incident victim who possesses Golden Freddy, based on solving a puzzle that spells out her name. But the second spirit's identity remains hotly contested, with theories ranging from the crying child to Michael Afton, to the logbook itself being possessed by something unexpected. The name puzzle became one of the book's most analysed elements. Through a complex process involving connecting page numbers, word searches, and grid coordinates, solvers extracted letters that many interpreted as spelling Cassidy. The methodology required following clues across dozens of pages, using numbers hidden in images to indicate which letters to select from specific word searches, building a solution through the kind of elaborate puzzle solving that has become FNAF's trademark. When this name emerged, it appeared to confirm the identity of one of the missing children incident victims, with widespread acceptance in the community that Cassidy possesses Golden Freddy. But another puzzle sequence suggested a different name, Evan. Using alternative solving methods and different grid interpretations, some theorists spelled out this name, arguing it represents the crying child. If Cassidy asks questions and the crying child, Evan, answers by circling images, it supports the Golden Both theory. Both spirits inhabit Golden Freddy, with Cassidy trying to understand her companion's trauma and identity. The nightmare Fredbear's circling makes perfect sense under this reading, as the crying child's memories would naturally center on the animatronic that killed him. However, the Evan solution remains controversial. Critics argue the methodology for extracting that name involves questionable assumptions and less clear puzzle logic than the Cassidy solution. Some suggest the grid might have been coincidence, reading patterns into noise rather than uncovering deliberate clues. The debate over whether Evan is truly the crying child's name, or a case of theorists seeing what they want to see, continues years after the book's release. The phrase "it's me" appears multiple times in the logbook, written in various ways and contexts. This callback to Golden Freddy's signature line from FNAF 1 reinforces the connection between the book and that animatronic. But how does a physical logbook connect to Golden Freddy? One theory suggests the logbook belonged to a night guard who encountered Golden Freddy frequently, creating a spiritual connection that allowed the animatronic souls to communicate through the book. Another theory proposes the book itself became possessed through proximity to supernatural events at Freddy's. The altered text shows clear physical manipulation. Someone drew on pages, circled images, changed printed text. This implies a physical being made these alterations, not pure spiritual communication. Who physically held this book and made these changes? If we accept it was a security guard's logbook, then presumably a guard owned it. But which guard? Evidence within suggests it might have belonged to Michael Afton during his time working at various Freddy's locations, which would place the book's timeline somewhere in his journey from FNAF 1 through his eventual fate in FNAF 6, supporting the Michael ownership theory. The book references events from FNAF 1 and FNAF 3, suggesting it was compiled after those games' events. Certain questions seem directed at Michael specifically. What do you remember? Might be asking about his memories of causing his brother's death. The recent dreams question could reference the nightmares from FNAF 4's gameplay. If we accept those represent Michael's guilt-induced dreams rather than literal events. The book's casual tone and occasional humor align with Michael's characterization as someone trying to maintain normalcy despite encountering supernatural horrors. However, if Michael owns the book, who makes the alterations? Michael himself could be answering questions posed by spirits contacting him through the book, or the spirits themselves might manipulate the book's appearance, making changes that manifest physically through supernatural means. The latter explanation requires accepting that ghosts can edit physical books, expanding our understanding of what possession allows in FNAF's universe. Some pages contain drawings that appear in the book, like a crude sketch of Nightmare Fredbear. Who drew this? If Michael dreams about nightmare animatronics, he might have sketched them in his logbook. If the crying child spirit influences the book, he might have manifested images of his trauma. The drawing style seems deliberately childish, possibly suggesting a child spirit created them, rather than an adult guard. The tally marks throughout the book create another puzzle. They appear in groups and patterns that some theorists believe encode additional information. Counting the marks, analyzing their groupings, and comparing their placement might spell out more hidden messages. But after years of analysis, no clear consensus has emerged about what, if anything, the tally marks mean beyond potential decoration or tracking an unspecified count. A page showing happiest day imagery, the puppet giving cake to children, appears alongside altered text and questions. This directly connects the logbook to the FNAF 3 good ending, suggesting the souls communicating through the book have knowledge of or involvement in that resolution. The girl receiving cake has black hair and pigtails, with some theorists identifying her as Cassidy based on description. If Cassidy asks questions about identity while simultaneously appearing in happiest day imagery, it suggests she might not have moved on when that minigame occurs, or that the logbook exists in a timeline where happiest day hasn't happened yet. The word search is scattered through the book. Hide clues beyond the name puzzles. Words related to fear, death, memory, and identity appear repeatedly. Some theorists believe every word search contains hidden information, that no detail is accidental. Hours have been spent analyzing which words might be significant, which combinations might indicate something, which patterns might reveal secrets. But distinguishing between intentional clues and coincidental word search content proves difficult, leading to analyses that might be finding patterns in randomness. Certain pages reference specific FNAF 3 events, including the minigames and the happiest day sequence. This timing matters for understanding when the logbook was compiled and when the spirits began communicating through it. If it's post-FNAF 3, then the souls should theoretically be at rest, yet they're still communicating. Does this mean happiest day failed? Or that some souls remain after most moved on? Or that the logbook exists in a different timeline continuity than the games proper? The Room 1280 reference confused many fans. A page casually mentions this room number, which would later become significant when a Fazbear Fright story titled The Man in Room 1280 told of William Afton kept alive in a hospital. Was Scott planting seeds for future stories? Was the room number coincidence? How does a book released before that story include references to it? The possibility that Scott planned story details years in advance demonstrates his complex approach to narrative, but it also makes extracting meaning from the logbook even more difficult, since we can't know which details pay off in future content. Questions about dreams appear multiple times. Do you have dreams? What do you see in your dreams? If directed at the crying child, these could reference the FNAF 4 nightmare sequences. If directed at Michael, they might ask about his guilt-induced nightmares. The emphasis on dreams suggests they're important for understanding identity and experience, that what characters dream reveals crucial information about their nature and trauma. The book ends with a section about the night guard's life outside work, asking about hobbies, friends, and future plans. These generic prompts take on eerie significance if we know the guard's fate. Michael Afton's ultimate fate in FNAF 6's Fire would make questions about future plans tragically ironic. Did he fill out this section not knowing he had limited time left? Or did he leave it blank, having no life outside his quest to undo his family's damage? Some pages appear to have been ripped out or damaged, with visible tears and missing content. Are these intentional elements of the puzzle, indicating information deliberately removed? Or production artifacts from creating a book, meant to look weathered and used? Theorists have analyzed what might have been on missing pages, what information could have been removed, and who might have torn them out. But without the actual missing content, these analyses remain speculative. Current understanding places the logbook as Michael Afton's possession, with Cassidy and possibly the crying child communicating through it, asking questions about identity and past trauma. But huge questions remain unresolved. When exactly does this communication happen? Why does it happen through a logbook, rather than more direct supernatural contact? What are the spirits trying to accomplish through these questions? Does learning their names matter to their ultimate fate? How does the logbook relate to the game's timeline of events? The logbook demonstrates both the best and worst of FNAF's puzzle approach. At its best, the elaborate clue chains reward careful observation and creative thinking, revealing information that couldn't be conveyed through straightforward exposition. At its worst, the puzzles become so complex and ambiguous that multiple solutions seem valid. Different solving methodologies yield different results, and even confirmed answers, like Cassidy, don't fully clarify what the revealed information means for understanding the larger story. As of 2025, dedicated theorists continue analyzing the logbook, convinced that more secrets remain hidden. Every page gets scrutinized, every word search-examined, every mark and alteration studied for potential significance. Perhaps future revelations will recontextualize elements that currently seem meaningless. Perhaps the book's full meaning requires information from games or stories not yet released. Or perhaps we've extracted everything intended to be found, and remaining ambiguities are either accidents of production or details Scott chose to leave unexplained, letting the community fill gaps with theories rather than definitive answers. The security logbook will likely remain one of FNAF's most discussed artifacts, a physical object existing in our world that supposedly connects to the franchise's fictional spirits, bridging reality and fiction in a way that makes the horror feel more immediate. Those faded questions, those altered images, those complex puzzles, they represent spirits crying out for recognition, for understanding, for someone to finally solve the mystery of who they are and what happened to them. Whether we've truly heard their message or only partially decoded it, whether we know their names or only think we do, remains one more mystery in a franchise built on questions that resist easy answers. The Bite of 87 culprit. Few mysteries in Five Nights at Freddy's have as much historical significance in the franchise's development as the Bite of 87. Mentioned in the very first phone call of the very first game, this incident immediately established that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had a dark history, that the animatronics were dangerous, that someone lost their frontal lobe in a traumatic attack. For years, identifying which animatronic bit whom and under what circumstances consumed the community's attention, generating theories, frame-by-frame analysis, and heated debates. Yet despite additional games providing context and seemingly building toward a revelation, the specific details of the Bite of 87 remain frustratingly unclear. Phone Guy's first night call in FNAF 1 casually mentions the incident. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know? He notes this as context for why animatronics can no longer walk around during the day. implying the bite happened during operational hours and prompted major policy changes. This established several facts. Someone survived losing their frontal lobe. An animatronic caused the injury, and the incident occurred during daylight hours when animatronics could move freely, suggesting it happened during a party or event with witnesses. FNAF 2, released as a prequel taking place in 1987, as confirmed by the paycheck dates shown at the end of the week, seem perfectly positioned to reveal the bite's details. The game occurs the same year, features multiple new animatronics that could be culprits, and builds tension throughout the week with phone guys' calls referencing a birthday party on the day shift where something might happen. The community eagerly anticipated a revelation cutscene or minigame showing the bite finally occurring, but the game ended without clear confirmation. No cutscene showed an animatronic biting someone's frontal lobe off during a birthday party. The bite of 87 remained nebulous, leaving theorists to analyze evidence and argue about which animatronic was responsible. Several candidates emerged based on behavior, design, and thematic elements. Mangle became an early favorite suspect. This destroyed version of Toy Foxy hangs from the ceiling, featuring prominent sharp teeth and extremely aggressive behavior. During FNAF 2's gameplay, Mangle lunges at the player with wide-open jaws, the jump scare emphasizing its teeth in ways other animatronics don't. The character's broken state suggests previous aggression. Perhaps it became mangled after attacking someone, leading to its dismantling and relegation to the parts and service room. Additionally, Mangle can move during the day in the prize corner, allowing access to party areas when the bite supposedly occurred. Toy Chica presents another compelling case. In Ultimate Custom Night, she has a voice line stating, "Where's my beak? Lodged in your forehead." Of course, this direct reference to something being lodged in someone's forehead seems too specific to be coincidence. Toy Chica's beak disappears when she becomes active during FNAF 2's nights, and the idea of a beak lodging in someone's frontal lobe fits the injury description. However, critics note that UCN came out years after FNAF 2, questioning whether Scott retroactively designated Toy Chica as the culprit, or if this is merely playful misdirection. Withered Foxy garnered support from some theorists who pointed to his aggressive behavior and damaged state. Out-of-order signs, sharp teeth, and lunging attacks, similar to FNAF 1's Foxy, made him seem like a natural suspect. However, the withered animatronics supposedly weren't active during the day and were being retrofitted for spare parts, making it unlikely Withered Foxy could bite someone during a birthday party. The puppet received consideration from theorists focusing on its strange behavior and apparent supernatural abilities, but the puppet lacks prominent teeth and seems more protective than aggressive based on its role in the Give Gifts minigame. The puppet causing a bite attack seems inconsistent with its characterization. Some theorists proposed Golden Freddy as the culprit, pointing to its mysterious nature and apparent supernatural power. But Golden Freddy barely appears physically in FNAF 2, existing more as a hallucination or apparition. How could it bite someone if it doesn't manifest physically during parties? The problem intensified when FNAF 4 revealed the bite of 83, a different bite from a different year, showing the crying child's death after Fredbear's spring-locked jaws clamped on his head. This confirmed that multiple bite incidents occurred, not just one. The bite of 83 showed an explicit death. The bite of 87 mentioned survival without a frontal lobe. These were definitely separate events. But FNAF 4's revelation also raised a question. If Scott showed the bite of 83 in detail, why hadn't he shown the bite of 87, despite its earlier mention, and seeming importance. This led some theorists to wonder if the byte of 87 actually matters to the lore, or if it was merely world-building flavor. Phone Guy mentions it casually, establishing the restaurant's troubled history, but does identifying the specific animatronic and victim advance our understanding of the story? Or is it a red herring, something that sounds important, but ultimately holds minimal narrative significance? Jeremy Fitzgerald, FNAF 2's protagonist guard, became a suspect as the victim. His name appears on the paycheck after completing Night 5, confirming his identity. Phone Guy's call before the day shift on Night 6 emphasizes taking the day shift position for the birthday party, positioning Jeremy to be present when something goes wrong. If Jeremy got bitten during this party, it would explain why the location closed and why he received payment despite subsequent events. However, problems arise with Jeremy as victim. He successfully completes Night 6 after the birthday party supposedly happens, suggesting nothing catastrophic occurred. The pink slip at the end cites him for tampering with animatronics and odor, the same reasons given for firing Mike Schmidt in FNAF 1, suggesting Jeremy survived his employment without major incident. Would someone who lost their frontal lobe in an attack complete a night shift afterward? The timeline doesn't quite work unless we assume Jeremy worked the day shift party between nights 5 and 6, got bitten, then somehow completed Night 6, despite the injury before being fired. Fritz Smith, who works the custom night, Night 7, in FNAF 2, also received consideration as potential victim or perpetrator. His pink slip cites the same reasons as Jeremy's, and his name matches one of the missing children incident victims, Fritz. Some theorists proposed Fritz Smith might be an identity used by someone else, possibly Michael Afton, continuing the pattern of Michael working under various names. But no clear evidence connects Fritz Smith to the byte of 87, either as victim or as being present when it occurred. The week's timeline creates problems. Phone Guy's calls build tension toward the birthday party, but then the week continues with Night 6 and 7. Did the bite happen between nights? After Night 7? During Night 6's day shift? The temporal ambiguity makes it difficult to connect specific events to the bite's occurrence, preventing definitive identification of victim or circumstances. Some theorists argue the bite of 87 happened at a completely different location or time than FNAF 2's events. Perhaps it occurred at the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location that FNAF 1 takes place in, years before the game itself, but still in 1987. Perhaps multiple Freddy's locations operated simultaneously, and the bite occurred at a sister location not directly shown in games. This would explain why FNAF 2 didn't clearly depict it, because it wasn't happening at that specific restaurant during that specific week. Phone Guy's survival through FNAF 2 and his apparent death in FNAF 1 complicates timeline understanding. He references the bite of 87 in FNAF 1 as past event, and he makes calls during FNAF 2's week in 1987. His existence during FNAF 2 suggests the bite might happen after his final call, during the day shift party he mentions. But if Jeremy or someone else got bitten, Phone Guy's FNAF 1 calls should reflect more concern or detail about the incident, rather than the casual mention we get. The policy change restricting animatronics to nighttime only seems to be the bite's main consequence. If we accept this policy emerged from the bite of 87, it confirms the incident happened during day hours when animatronics could roam freely among guests. This rules out bites occurring during night shifts when animatronics already behaved aggressively, suggesting the bite happened during normal operations, possibly during a show or party. when animatronic programming went wrong or a malfunction occurred. Current community consensus remains divided between Mangle and Toy Chica as most likely culprits, with significant minorities supporting other candidates or arguing the mystery is unsolvable with available information. Many theorists have moved on from the Bite of 87 entirely, accepting that while historically important for launching FNAF's mystery hunting culture, the specific details matter less than originally assumed. The Bite served its narrative purpose in establishing dangerous animatronics and troubled history. Whether Mangle or Toy Chica or someone else caused it, doesn't fundamentally change our understanding of characters, timeline, or major plot developments. This represents an interesting evolution in FNAF theorizing. Early in the franchise, the Bite of 87 seemed like a crucial mystery demanding solution. It was mentioned in the first game, tied to important lore about animatronic behavior, and promised concrete revelation. But as additional games expanded the narrative in unexpected directions, as new mysteries emerged with clearer importance to understanding character motivations and supernatural mechanics, the Bite of 87 faded from central concern. It became a footnote, a historical detail that probably has an answer somewhere in the game's details, but no longer drives passionate debate or analysis. Scott Cawthon has never directly confirmed the culprit, allowing ambiguity to persist, given that he showed the Bite of 83 explicitly in FNAF 4. His choice not to depict the Bite of 87 seems deliberate. Perhaps he enjoys maintaining this particular mystery. Perhaps he considers the specific answer less important than the Bite's role in establishing world building. Perhaps there is no intended canon answer, with multiple interpretations being equally valid in his mind. As of 2025, the Bite of 87 remains technically unsolved. A relic from FNAF's earliest days, when the community obsessively analyzed every detail searching for concrete answers. New fans often discover this mystery and become excited, thinking they might solve what veterans couldn't. But veteran theorists largely shrug, having made peace with not knowing, accepting that some mysteries don't have satisfying revelations, that not every question gets answered clearly. The Bite of 87 taught the community an important lesson. Sometimes the speculation is more rewarding than the solution. Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination. And sometimes a mystery remains mysterious, not because we haven't solved it, but because there might not be a definitive answer to find. The Phone Guy mystery. In the original Five Nights at Freddy's, players spend every night listening to phone messages from a cheerful, helpful voice guiding them through their security guard duties. This Phone Guy became one of the franchise's most beloved characters despite never appearing on screen, his casual demeanor and dark humor providing relief from the tension of surviving against murderous animatronics. But Phone Guy's identity, his ultimate fate, and his role in the larger story remain frustratingly unclear, even after years of games expanding the timeline and revealing details about other characters. We know Phone Guy's basic role. He's a long-time Freddy Fazbear's Pizza employee, possibly a manager or trainer, who records messages for new security guards explaining procedures and providing warnings based on his own experiences. His calls appear in FNAF 1, FNAF 2, and FNAF 3, establishing him as someone who worked at multiple locations across different time periods. But beyond this functional role, crucial details about his identity remain mysterious. The most fundamental question: what's his actual name? Unlike William Afton, Henry Emily, Michael Afton, and other major characters whose names we eventually learn, Phone Guy remains nameless throughout the franchise. The community simply calls him Phone Guy because he communicates through phone messages. Some theorists propose specific names based on paycheck Easter eggs or book characters, but none received confirmation. Is the name unimportant? Or is Phone Guy's anonymity deliberate, representing the everyman caught in Fazbear Entertainment's nightmare without the importance of named characters? His fate in FNAF 1 appears clear from what players hear. During his Night 4 message, we hear animatronics attacking him, doors being banged, the music box winding down, and eventually, Golden Freddy's signature groan before the message cuts out. The sounds strongly suggest Phone Guy died during this recorded call, likely stuffed into a suit as he feared, becoming one of the animatronics' victims. However, some theorists have questioned this interpretation. Could he have survived? Could the call be a recording from an earlier incident? The audio evidence is compelling, but not explicitly confirmed through visual presentation. The FNAF 2 calls establish Phone Guy working at that location before FNAF 1's events, given the game's 1987 setting. He sounds younger, more optimistic, less weary than in FNAF 1's calls. He expresses excitement about the new animatronics and the restaurant's grand reopening. This chronologically earlier version provides context for his FNAF 1 pessimism. He's seen the business decline, witnessed incidents, grown jaded after years of employment. But these calls also confirm he survived the FNAF 2 location's closure and the bite of 87, if that occurred at that location. FNAF 3's calls differ significantly. Labeled as training tapes, they sound recorded by a younger Phone Guy, possibly from even earlier in the timeline, possibly from Fredbear's Family Diner, or the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. The focus on Springlock suit operations suggests he worked with these early technologies, training performers on proper safety protocols. His voice in these tapes lacks the casual familiarity of FNAF 1 and 2, sounding more official, more by the book, like someone reading prepared training materials rather than offering personal advice. This spans his employment across potentially decades, from early Springlock era through FNAF 2's 1987 events to FNAF 1's 1993 setting. That's a long career at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, witnessing the company's rise and fall, the multiple incidents, the deaths of children, the haunted animatronics. Why does he stay? Some theorists suggest loyalty, others guilt, others financial desperation. Perhaps he knows too much to leave safely, or perhaps he genuinely cares about the restaurants despite their horrors. The question of how much Phone Guy knows about William Afton's crimes generates debate. His calls never directly reference murder or missing children, always dancing around incidents with euphemisms like unfortunate events or tragedies. Does this mean he's unaware of the specifics? Or is he complicit, helping cover up crimes to protect the company? His warning about the animatronics stuffing people into suits because they think you're an empty endoskeleton suggests he knows about bodies in suits, but he frames it as the animatronics being confused rather than actively malevolent. Some theorists proposed Phone Guy might be Henry Emily, the co-founder who stayed with the company after William's corruption. This would explain his extensive knowledge, his long employment, his apparent authority to make training tapes and guide new employees. The guilt and resignation in his FNAF 1 calls could reflect Henry witnessing his business partner murder children and not stopping it. However, FNAF 6 confirmed Henry's ultimate fate and positioning, and his final speech doesn't sound like Phone Guy's voice or speaking style, making this identification unlikely. Others suggested Phone Guy might be Michael Afton, using phone messages to guide his own future shifts at different locations in a time loop or recording messages under a fake voice. But Michael's characterization in Sister Location's ending monologue sounds nothing like Phone Guy's casual demeanor, and timeline issues complicate this theory significantly. Michael's specific mission to find and confront his father doesn't align with Phone Guy's apparent acceptance of working for the company indefinitely. The Fritz Smith theory proposes Phone Guy's real name is Fritz, connecting him to one of the missing children incident victim names. This dark interpretation suggests he worked at Freddy's even after his younger brother's murder there, possibly explaining his intimate knowledge of the animatronics and his warnings about their behavior. But this theory requires accepting name coincidences and doesn't explain why he'd continue employment at the location where his sibling died. Phone Guy's death raises technical questions if we accept it occurred in FNAF 1. Who sent the pre-recorded messages for nights 5, 6 and 7? If he died night 4, these must be older recordings, but they reference specific night numbers suggesting they were recorded for sequential nights. Some theorists propose he recorded all messages in advance, anticipating not surviving to make live calls. Others suggest multiple Phone Guys exist, with different employees making calls at different locations, explaining apparent continuity across multiple games. The newspaper clippings in FNAF 1 mention someone using a spare yellow suit, heavily implied to be William Afton in Spring Bonnie. Phone Guy's calls reference this, noting a yellow suit in the back was used, and now the animatronics act strangely. Does Phone Guy suspect who used the suit? Does he know William Afton's identity and role in murders? His phrasing suggests ignorance, treating the suit use as mysterious, rather than immediately connecting it to specific criminal acts. Interestingly, Phone Guy expresses genuine care for the night guard's safety, providing tips and strategies for surviving. His Night 4 message in FNAF 1 wishes the guard good luck, and his FNAF 2 calls show concern about the animatronic's aggressive behavior. This distinguishes him from uncaring management figures common in horror stories. He's complicit in covering up crimes and maintaining dangerous operations, yet he also tries helping individuals survive their shifts. This moral complexity makes him more interesting than a simple villain or innocent victim. "I always wondered what was in all those empty heads" line from his FNAF Euro 1 Night 5 message sparked theory about his death. Was he literally stuffed into a Freddy Fazbear head after his death? His body crammed into a suit as he feared? The line takes on horrific significance if we imagine him trapped in an animatronic endoskeleton, actually experiencing what he'd only speculated about. But without visual confirmation, his specific fate post-death remains speculative. Some fans created elaborate backstories. Phone Guy as a former performer who moved into management. Phone Guy as a technician who knew the animatronics' inner workings. Phone Guy as a corporate spy documenting issues for legal purposes. These speculative biographies attempt filling the void left by canonical silence, giving character to a voice without a face. The community's affection for Phone Guy, despite minimal concrete information, demonstrates the power of good voice acting and writing. Actor Scott Cawthon gave Phone Guy enough personality through delivery alone that fans care about his fate, despite knowing almost nothing about him. The Help Wanted tape recordings introduced new training tapes, but voiced by a different person, establishing that Phone Guy isn't the only employee making instructional recordings. This confirms multiple staff create such materials, weakening theories dependent on Phone Guy being uniquely positioned. but it also raises questions about how many phone guys exist, whether the voice we hear across games is always the same person, or multiple employees with similar roles. Current consensus accepts Phone Guy as a longtime Freddy's employee who died during FNAF 1's events. Killed by animatronics he'd worked alongside for years. His identity beyond this role, his real name, his complete background, his knowledge of William's crimes, and his ultimate fate after death remain mysterious. Some theorists continue investigating, convinced his identity holds significance. Others accept him as an intentionally anonymous everyman, representing the ordinary workers caught in extraordinary horror. Not important enough for names, but important enough to remember. The Phone Guy mystery demonstrates FNAF's selective revelation approach. Scott Cawthon provides detailed backgrounds for some characters, while leaving others deliberately vague. Major players in the tragedy get names, motivations, detailed character arcs. Supporting characters like Phone Guy get enough personality to be memorable, but remain functionally anonymous, their mystery part of their appeal rather than something requiring solution. Whether this represents artistic choice or incomplete storytelling, whether Phone Guy's anonymity serves the narrative or frustrates it, depends on personal preference about how much clarity stories should provide. As of 2025, Phone Guy remains what he's always been, a helpful voice guiding players through dangerous nights, a tragic victim of animatronic violence, a company man caught in horrific circumstances, and an enigma whose real identity, full knowledge, and ultimate significance remain unknown. Perhaps that's sufficient. Perhaps some characters work better as mysteries than as fully explained entities. Perhaps Phone Guy's power lies precisely in his ambiguity, allowing each player to imagine who he was, what he knew, what he represented in the larger tragedy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Conclusion: embracing the unknowable. As we reach the end of our journey through Five Nights at Freddy's most enduring mysteries, one truth becomes undeniable. Some questions might never receive satisfying answers. The locked box will likely remain closed. The crying child's name may never be officially confirmed. The Fredbear plush's speaker might stay forever uncertain. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie could continue existing as inexplicable entities. Golden Freddy's souls may never be definitively counted. William Afton's motivations might remain frustratingly mixed and unclear. Midnight Motorist's cryptic story could persist in its ambiguity. The security logbook's full meaning may exceed our grasp. The Bite of 87's culprit might fade into legend. Phone Guy's identity could stay anonymous forever. This realization might seem disappointing at first glance. After all the hours of analysis, after the elaborate theories and passionate debates, after frame-by-frame examinations and complex puzzle solutions, admitting that some mysteries remain unsolved feels like failure. But perhaps that's precisely wrong. Perhaps these unsolved mysteries represent not failure, but success. Success in creating a narrative so rich and layered that it exceeds simple explanation. Success in maintaining genuine mystery in an age where every story gets dissected and explained. Success in valuing the journey of exploration over the destination of definitive answers. Scott Cawthon built something remarkable with Five Nights at Freddy's. He created a horror franchise that works on multiple levels. As a survival game testing reflexes and pattern recognition, as an atmospheric horror experience filled with dread and tension, as a business simulation commentary about entertainment industry darkness, and as an elaborate puzzle box narrative where every detail might hide crucial information. That final aspect, the puzzle box nature, has defined the community's relationship with the franchise more than any other element. But puzzle boxes traditionally have solutions. You manipulate the correct pieces in the correct sequence, and the box opens, revealing its contents. FNAF's puzzle box operates differently. Some pieces fit together perfectly, revealing portions of the image. Other pieces seem to fit multiple ways, creating different pictures depending on how you arrange them. Still, other pieces might not belong to this puzzle at all, or they might connect to pictures we haven't seen yet, waiting for future games to provide context that makes them meaningful in retrospect. The mysteries we've explored tonight exemplify this peculiar approach. The box from FNAF 4 literally exists as an unsolvable puzzle, with Scott himself admitting he's no longer certain what it contains. The crying child's name emerges from elaborate logbook puzzles that yield multiple potential answers depending on methodology. The shadows manifest as visible entities across multiple games, yet resist all attempts at definitive explanation. Golden Freddy's dual soul question splits the community despite years of evidence accumulation on both sides. These aren't mysteries that reward careful attention with clear revelation. They're mysteries that reward engagement with deeper questions, with exploration of possibility, with acceptance that sometimes understanding means grasping the shape of ambiguity, rather than extracting certainty from confusion. They teach patience, humility, and the realization that not every story element needs explaining for a narrative to work. Consider how differently FNAF functions from typical franchises. Most horror series eventually explain their monsters, where they came from, what they want, how they operate. FNAF explains some elements. We understand Remnant. We know possession mechanics. We recognize William as the primary villain. But crucial details remain deliberately unclear, maintaining mystery alongside revelation. This creates lasting engagement, keeping the franchise feeling alive and discussable years after individual games' release. The community's relationship with these mysteries has evolved over time. Early FNAF fans approached each new game expecting answers, assuming mysteries existed to be solved. Veterans now approach with different expectations, appreciating clues and context while accepting that some questions might persist indefinitely. This maturation reflects growing understanding of Scott's storytelling approach. He provides pieces, but doesn't always assemble them into definitive pictures, leaving space for interpretation, speculation, and ongoing conversation. Importantly, these unsolved mysteries don't prevent FNAF from telling coherent stories. We understand the broad strokes. William Afton murdered children. Their spirits possessed animatronics. The haunted machines sought revenge. Successive locations tried continuing business despite supernatural consequences. Michael Afton tried fixing his family's damage. Henry Emily orchestrated a final confrontation intended to free trapped souls. This skeleton of narrative works even without knowing exactly who speaks through the Fredbear plush, or precisely which animatronic caused the bite of 87. The unsolved mysteries add texture, depth, and continued relevance without being strictly necessary for comprehension. Their enrichment, invitation to engage more deeply, rewards for those who want to analyze rather than casually consume. But they're not gatekeeping. Someone can enjoy FNAF without solving every puzzle, without knowing every theory, without determining whether Golden Freddy houses one soul or two. The mysteries serve fans who want more without punishing those satisfied with less. Looking forward, Steel Wool Studios continues expanding the franchise with Security Breach, Ruin, and future projects. These new entries introduce new mysteries, while occasionally providing context for older questions. Help Wanted 2 and its mask mechanic might relate to surveillance themes from FNAF 4. Secret of the Mimic explores origins of that specific entity, while potentially connecting to older lore. Each new release provides more pieces for the community to examine, debate, and attempt fitting into the larger picture. But will these new games solve the oldest mysteries? Probably not comprehensively. Some details might get clarified. A name might be confirmed, a relationship explained, a timeline question resolved. But the core mysteries explored tonight will likely persist, woven too deeply into a FNAF's identity to be fully extracted and explained. They've become part of the franchise's fabric, defining what FNAF is as much as any specific game or character. This creates an interesting phenomenon where FNAF exists simultaneously as a finished story and an ongoing mystery. The main narrative of William's crimes and their consequences reached a kind of conclusion in FNAF 6, with Henry's speech and the fire intending to end the cycle. Yet the story continues, both in new games and in ongoing community discussion about unresolved questions from that supposedly concluded narrative. FNAF is simultaneously over and never ending, resolved and forever mysterious. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson these unsolved mysteries teach. Stories don't require complete explanation to be meaningful, satisfying, or successful. The questions can be as important as the answers, the speculation as valuable as the confirmation, the mystery as engaging as the revelation. FNAF has thrived by embracing this philosophy, by creating a narrative that invites participation while resisting complete comprehension, by valuing interpretation over definitive truth. So we end where we began, settled into those quiet corners where answers hide, where theories spiral endlessly, where even the creator sometimes forgets what he intended. We've explored the box that won't open, the child whose name eludes us, the plush whose speaker remains uncertain, the shadows that defy explanation, the animatronic whose souls are disputed, the villain whose motivations stay mixed, the minigame that confounds interpretation, the logbook whose communications puzzle endlessly, the bite whose culprit fades into legend, and the helpful voice who remains forever anonymous. These mysteries persist not as failures, but as features, not as problems requiring solutions, but as invitations to continued engagement. They remind us why we fell in love with Five Nights at Freddy's in the first place. Not because it provided easy answers, but because it asked fascinating questions. Not because it resolved neatly, but because it sprawled mysteriously. Not because it explained everything, but because it trusted us to explore the spaces between certainty and speculation. Whether you're drifting towards sleep as these words wash over you, whether you're taking notes for your next theory video, whether you're simply passing time in FNAF's strange, compelling universe, know that the mysteries we've explored tonight remain open for your interpretation. Your theories matter, your analyses contribute. Your understanding of these ambiguous elements is as valid as anyone's, because no definitive answers exist to prove you wrong. The locked box stays locked. The names remain uncertain. The shadows lurk unexplained. And that's okay. That's perfect. That's FNAF. If you enjoyed this exploration of unsolved mysteries, if these questions intrigue you as much as they intrigue me, consider liking and subscribing. Let me know in the comments which mystery you find most compelling, which question you most want answered, which theory you believe most strongly. And until next time, may your nights be peaceful, your theories compelling, and your mysteries forever fascinating in their refusal to be completely solved. Welcome back to the dark. Welcome back to the questions. Welcome back to Five Nights at Freddy's Eternal Enigmas.